When we analyze OEE losses, we usually focus on improving the machine with the worst OEE, but that's really not in the best interest of your company. Hello, I'm Tom. Welcome to my channel where we talk about continuous improvement in an industrial setting. And today's topic, it is on OEE, overall equipment effectiveness, and especially on how do we pick where to improve and how much is OEE improvement worth anyway. Got a whole course on that. Go and check that out. A couple of videos as well. But today it's more about the choice of which machines would we like to prioritize when improving our OEE. And for this there are sort of two important things, which is what's the benefit, right? So do we get extra capacity or is it a huge labor cost? But also how much potential do we see in the OEE improvement, right? If you have a line where you can sort of already spot that there is 10, maybe even 20 percentage points of OEE to be gained by just streamlining it, probably go for it, even if it's not in the priority of pure cost and capacity. Now, that part we'll not go into that much in this video, but we will go into where do you put priority. And this comes from the basic assumption that when we analyze OEE, we look at our different lines. So these are machines in one big production process. And we see there are some different OEE levels. And that third machine in our total line, it really is only a 30% OEE. Many companies would say this is a prime candidate for our OEE improvement. And that second machine is doing so much better than the rest that we should basically just keep it at the level and sort of forget about putting too many improvements there. And this comes from KPIs put there by sort of higher management, sometimes plant director, but often even one or two levels higher, like regional directors, who put in place KPIs like we want 80% OEE across the board, or we would like to have an average plant OEE of 60 or 65%, whatever your current level is at right now, plus a couple of percentages, right? And then they sort of just count all of the lines into that average. So this one would just really tank your average OEE. But what I would like you to focus on is why do you actually want to improve the OEE? Because OEE in itself is not a goal for improvement. It's very useful. It's a very useful tool for measuring, for analyzing where your problems are, for setting direction, for comparing. Really, it is a brilliant tool. Use OEE, but it is not the end goal. Right? If we look at asset utilization, that means how much of the time is the machine running and really needing to be in production to produce our products, then we know where we have capacity constraints. Now, what do you do for this? You don't really look per se at the OEE. You look at the total uptime, and not even uptime, it's the total planned in time. So some machines that run very nicely also are required to basically run throughout the week, right? The whole day, every day, basically, right? So what we have there is a very high asset utilization. But what can also happen is that machines, even this one, that has only 30% OEE, so it has, for every hour that it's running, it has over 2 extra hours of all kinds of setups and slow movers and what have you, that may have such a huge capacity that your total production line doesn't really need it. Now, to get to sort of what are limits where we would like to be, we have, of course, 100% utilization. And anything that is under 90% utilization, it's basically okay, right? Unless you really have a strong growth path that next year you want to boost your volume by 20 or 30%. If you look at this year or next year's volume budget, and you know that you're roughly around 90 or so percent, or a bit under 90% asset utilization, it's all fine. What do I mean with fine? Because basically you've got some overcapacity in the plant. If you are at that level, you will be able to handle some bumps in volume or some small problems here and there. And getting a better OEE does not translate into getting more production through your factory. Because if you needed more production, you would have just bumped the asset utilization a little bit. You can just add a couple more hours. You can have that line do full working days, full shifts, and just get to that needed volume. These lines here, even though there is some cost consideration to take into account, but basically if they're around 30-ish or so % asset utilization, that means that they have so much overcapacity for the production range that you're doing at the moment that you only need to, for instance, have these running round the clock, and these two lines, they will just make up during the day shift. So it may be that in their day shift, they are actually quite highly used. As long as that day shift is not fully set in stone for you, it actually means your entire factory could be running differently, right? Could be extending those hours a bit. Or maybe they're only used for a couple of products, also quite common, right? So that sort of the semi-finished, it goes maybe directly into the market or to one of these two machines. Both were originally laid out that they could handle basically the entire production, but you now have two different products that just require a different machine. In that case, you have so much flexibility in how you use it that increasing these OEEs will not lead to more product going to the market. So you're not getting contribution margin. You're not getting the extra sales volume. It may still be, as in my example here, if they are running round the clock, these are only running day shifts. If it goes a bit worse than here and you need to bump this to about 40% or so, then suddenly you need to go into overtime on a frequent basis, right? You don't really need to add a full shift, but you do quite often need to add something. Considerations like that are important. That is the second reason why OEE improvements are important. If you have a lot of manning on a line, on a machine, then improving the OEE means that for the same product volume, you need fewer machine hours multiplied by a lot of people. That is a lot of cost reduction, potentially at least, if you do lay those people off, or if there were flex workers and you now do not call in the flex. That is a separate consideration from pure capacity studies. I would suggest that you always focus on capacity first. You don't ignore it, but the big money and the future of your company, because if you're laying people off all the time, that's not really a good future-oriented strategy. The future and the bigger money should be in being able to free up capacity to serve more customers, to serve different segments of the market, to maybe become so flexible that you get into higher paying type of jobs. For that, make that translation. Now, how do you make that translation? You basically just add up all the hours that somebody is touching that machine. So of course, that's the time that operators are working the machine, any production time. It's also any cleaning or setup time, even if it's not done by your operators. And also things like preventive maintenance, or whenever your engineers or technical service are touching the machine, that time should also count. So that's important why you do not take something like a operating efficiency or only the performance part of OEE. You take the entire, the overall equipment effectiveness levels. You want all of the hours that somebody is doing something with the machine, so it's not available for something. It's not really just resting. And that you just divide by 24 hours in a day or 168 in a week. A secondary capacity study would be smart, because this is pure calendar capacity, right? So you divide it by, and let's take that sort of weekly level. $168 hours for a week, but also if you have a certain shift pattern or a certain way that you work with people. For instance, there are many manufacturings that will work 5 days a week in a double shift. So if that is your example, 5 days, and then you have 2 shifts of 8 hours. So we get to 80 hours a week. Remember, those actual hours, they do include everything that touches the line, right? Anytime you are doing something with that line. But then pick this one for your short to midterm asset utilization. It's basically what you do with your human resources as well as your machine resources. And this for your company will be the more practical one at the moment. It will also make sure you don't have to go into that step change of adding shifts or adding overtime. This is if you are really looking at investments. So if you're thinking of adding machinery, probably adding more production time is cheaper in the short and midterm. Maybe not in the long term, but probably even in the long term. So this is for machine investments. This is for almost every organization. And when you see that you are actually using one of your lines, including the cleaning, including the setup time, for about 80 hours a week, and you have this 2-shift, 5 days a week pattern, then you are very close to that 100%. Which means that as soon as you would get an extra customer order, or you have a bit of fluctuation week to week, you're not going to be able to service them. So an OEE improvement on such a line, where you are at 95, 100%, that will give you the flexibility to serve customers. Now, when you make next year's volume prediction, your budget basically, and you see that your asset utilization is going to be more than 100%, and believe me, there are plenty of companies that have this situation, that a few of their machines are over 100% asset utilization in their budget, then you know that you need to work on that machine's OEE. Or you need to go into overtime, you need to offload products, you need to maybe externalize part of your production. All of those options will be disruptive to your operation, but management usually cares more about they will be more expensive options than you have right now. So the OEE improvements on those lines are worth way more than OEE improvements on the other lines. And that is how you use a capacity analysis to focus where you want to prioritize your OEE improvements on the line, where you need to really get into the processes. If you do that correctly, you can save your company from having to invest in more machinery. And that is a very high cost saving. Unfortunately, one that is not always really valued within a management calculation, within managerial finances. But if you want to know how to really get that in line in all your reporting, go check out my course on how to actually calculate savings and how to assess the value of improvements and improvement teams. For now, I wish you the best of luck assessing which OEE you want to improve, improving that OEE, and as always, enjoying the continuous improvement journey.